Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. It is winterween and I'm very excited about it. It's my very first vlog of 2021, so it's gonna be a fun time. I actually have to leave for work in like 30 minutes. It's Monday morning and I work like a later afternoon to evening shift today. So once I come home from work, I'm definitely not gonna have any natural light to work with, so I figured I would start out this vlog right now while I still have some good natural light. So I am starting 2 books today. One actually I already started last night at exactly midnight when the readathon started because I just couldn't wait. I actually haven't started like a single book this year, so I'm excited to read my first books of the year during this readathon, but the first book that I want to finish today, because it's always nice when you have a readathon like the first day to finish a book, just so you feel like you can hit the ground running, and that is going to be Monstress Volume 5. This is what I'm reading for the prompt, read a short story / novella. I'm hoping that I can just jump immediately into this one. I read volumes 1 through 4 last year. And I think the 4th volume I read in maybe June or July. I'm pretty sure that I remember everything and it's still fresh enough to dive right in to volume 5, but this is what I'm planning on reading after work, and then that'll be one whole prompt done. Monstress is definitely my favorite graphic novel series at the moment. It's absolutely stunning, like the artwork and the story. It's like a grand fantasy epic with lots of grimdark, steampunk, and horror elements to it. It's really cool. There's not a whole lot I can show you in like this volume without it being spoilery, but the artwork is absolutely stunning. So I'm definitely looking forward to binging this after work. And then the book that I actually started last night at exactly midnight, because it's also the longest book that I have on my TBR and the one that it'll probably take me like the whole week to finish possibly, and that is going to be Dreamcatcher by Stephen King. This works for a number of prompts. So this takes place in November. Well, it takes place a lot of different times, but the main story really takes place in November, which I consider winter. I know winter doesn't actually start until like December, but it's November in Maine. There's snow on the ground. It's very cold. That like counts as winter to me, so technically it does. And then there is like a lot of like time jumping in here to different places in the characters' lives, so there is significant page time where it is winter in this book, and then there's also blue on the cover. I really did pick this book just because it fit a number of prompts, and I'm trying to read all of Stephen King's work, and I actually haven't heard like the nicest reviews about this one. This definitely doesn't really, I feel like, make anyone's favorite Stephen King book lists or anything like that, and I don't think it has the best ratings on Goodreads as well, but honestly this is one of my favorite Stephen King covers. I know don't judge a book by the cover, but I think it's gorgeous, and I did not know going into this one. I am only on page 28 and it's like 600 pages, so definitely not far into it at all, but I did not realize that this has to do with aliens. So I am like monumentally more excited to pick this book up now because I love alien stuff, and that also like makes my expectations, it kind of changes it a little bit going into this book because I love horror. I love horror movies surrounding aliens, and I like good alien horror movies obviously, but even like the really bad ones are fun. I just love aliens as a concept. Like even the movies that are like honestly bad, they're still a really fun time if there's aliens involved. So I'm now really looking forward to this one because aliens, and this was written in I believe like 2000 or 2001. Yeah, this is copyright 2001, so I almost wonder if it's gonna have like sort of like Y2K almost sort of vibes, where I feel like a lot of horror books that were coming out around like the late 90s, early 2000s have to do with like that change of millennium, and I feel like aliens were really popular at that time as well, so I'm just really excited to read this one. I feel like even if it's not going to be a good time, it's gonna be a good time, if you know what I mean. So I do have the audiobook for this one. I'll try and listen during work because I can listen to like stuff on my phone while I am at work, so I might pick up the audiobook of this one. I'm very hit or miss on Stephen King audiobooks depending on who reads them. His writing style I feel like is so overly descriptive that I don't mind it ever in like the physical versions, but it depends on who's reading the audio, because sometimes I love the audiobooks and sometimes I just cannot stand them. So I might pick this up during work, I might not be able to, depending on the audiobook. But that is really all I have because I have to get ready for work now. But just wanted to come on here, introduce the readathon. I'm very excited. This is gonna be like, the readathon itself is a week total, so this is gonna take place of my weekly reading vlog, so I'm very excited to be participating in Winterween. I'm ready to read some good books in 2021, and I will catch you guys in the next clip. This is gonna be a shorter update, because I just spent an hour and a half filming my top 10 favorite books of 2020 video, which I just was not anticipating it taking that long, but I clearly cannot stop talking about my favorite 10 books of 2020, so that's obviously not gonna be too fun to edit. And honestly, I was hoping to film more sit-down videos today other than that one, but I'm not going to at this point, because I probably only have about maybe 15 to 20 more minutes of natural light, and I just am tired of talking. I talked for an hour and a half, so a quick little update here. It is Tuesday the 5th, and I have finished one book. I finished Monstress. I started it last night after work, and I really enjoyed it. This is actually my favorite so far in the series. There have been 5 volumes, obviously, and I don't know when the 6th one is coming out, which is both a good and a bad thing, because when I started this, I was worried that I wouldn't have volume 4 fresh enough in my memory. So like the first, I'd say 15 to 20 or so pages were a little bit rough, as I was just remembering small details and where exactly everyone was at the start of this volume. But I think just because there's no release date so far for this series, they have been coming out with like one a year, and it's been like later on in the year, so maybe we'll be getting the 6th volume end of 2021, but I think that I'll probably read all 5 volumes again before the next one comes out, because there's a lot that happens in this volume, and it's my favorite volume so far. My favorite, like, it just has so much humor, so many badass characters being introduced, and one of my favorite characters, Kippa, had a lot of really cool moments as well. So it was really, really good. So hopefully that's an indicator of how 2021 is going to go. Now, I haven't read a lot of Dreamcatcher yet. In fact, I am only on page 68, and it does take place in the winter, which is good. I was a little nervous that it wasn't going to take place as much in the winter as I wanted it for Winterween, but it does take place in the winter. The audiobook is not bad, but I think that I want to start off reading it and putting all the characters in my head before picking it up, because I think this just has to do with like reading styles and learning styles, but I greatly prefer audiobooks with full cast narrations. That just helps me, because for whatever reason, when I'm reading physically, I can start a book and I can keep track of all the characters really easily, and just kind of have like mental pictures in my head, it's no problem. If the audiobook, if they don't have like different voices, it's harder for me to tell at first which character's which, just because that's not like my strength as a reader. I'm better at visual than audio. There are 4 main characters in this book, but their names are Beaver, whose real name is Joe, Jonesy, and Pete, and Henry. So all those names, for whatever reason, like, they're very similar. It's a group of friends who have known each other since childhood, and the first part of this book is it's introducing each character, and they're very interconnected in their own stories because they're all friends, but their names are just like stored in that same place in my mind, like Pete and Henry. Like those are very similar names. I don't know if that's making any sense, but I think I'm going to read like at least 150 pages just so I can have a better understanding before I pick up the audiobook, because the audiobook is good, not great. I feel like a lot of Stephen King's audiobooks are either amazing or just okay. But yeah, I'm on page 68 and it's okay. Stephen King's books are usually like really slow to get started because there's a lot of character stuff going on before you really get to a plot. So I'm interested. I'm interested in seeing where this is gonna go. This is honestly actually kind of fun because I feel like Stephen King is so popular that a lot of his books, like everyone kind of knows what they're about. Like I feel like even if you haven't even watched the movies or read the books, everyone kind of has some semblance of The Shining or Pet Sematary or Cujo or Carrot. Like I feel like everyone kind of knows the plots of a lot of his books. So it's kind of fun reading a book where I just know it's Stephen King and I don't know anything about it. That's fun to me, especially because I feel like his early stuff gets really hyped up, and then obviously the stuff that he's coming out with right now is hyped up because the newer releases tend to generate more excitement, at least on social media. So I feel like there's like this whole span of time in like the 90s to like the aughts, you know, like 1992 to 2005, I feel like, where I don't hear a lot about those books that he published in that span of time. So I don't really have anything else to say for this update, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm probably going to add some more books to my TBR for this readathon, just because when I was filming my top 10 favorite books video, like half of them were horror sci-fi and half of them were fantasy, and now I'm in the mood to pick up a fantasy. But I was trying to have most of them be horror books because it's winterween. I might see if I can throw another dark fantasy in there because that sounds really fun at the moment. So yeah, I will talk to you guys later. Hello there, happy Thursday. So I kind of did an update yesterday because a coup was happening in the US, which so fun, love the timeline we're in, and I worked. And honestly, it was kind of bizarre to be doing anything at the same time that like a literal coup was trying to happen. Yesterday was definitely a really bizarre day. I work pretty close to my state's capital, so that was unpleasant. But on the plus side, we flipped the Senate. Yesterday was just a roller coaster and super weird, so that's why I didn't get it on here, because I felt really weird just talking about books while so many things were happening. It was like a roller coaster of highs where, you know, Georgia went blue, flipped the Senate, everything was going great, and then right when you had that high, you had the low of a literal coup happening, and it was just a weird day, right? I saw a TikTok that said something along the lines of, I'm so tired of living an A-push DBQ assignment every single week. So if you ever took AP US History, you get that. Definitely a weird thing to think about, just like how much condensed history that we're living through at the moment, especially because like I have younger siblings. Two of them, one of them is in grade school still, and then one of them is in early junior high. So they're living through this too, but I feel like they are going to not really realize how crazy this time that we're living through is. None of this has anything to do with reading, but I think it's important and it's just been on my mind. But I also am a really big journaler. I've been like keeping a diary or a journal pretty consistently since first grade. And so that's something that I've really always done, and it's always been interesting to look back through and seeing kind of where I was at certain times in my life. And I was just thinking back to yesterday about how crazy it is to like go back and look at my 2020, really anything I feel like from like 2016 to 2020 at the very least. I'm sure, you know, nothing's magically solved clearly in 2021. It's gonna be very interesting to look back on these entries and be like, wow, we really did live through all of this shit, huh? But yeah, I've been reading, and it's always really interesting to see in terms of events that are going on. It's very much 50-50. Sometimes when there's a bunch of bad things going on in the world, you can't really focus, or at least I can't really focus on reading. It just feels weird to be focusing on that, and I know a lot of times that's just my anxiety speaking, but then other times I really latch on to reading as a form of escapism and just trying to get a little bit of joy and really disconnect from phones and everything, which this was another one of those times. But yeah, long story short, it's been a crazy week, crazy start to 2021. I did read, let's see, 2 things since we last talked, and I completed 2 prompts. So the first prompt was read a book with the word haunt in the title, and that was The Haunting of Tramcar 015 by P. Djeli Clark, and this one was okay. I honestly was expecting to like this a whole lot better. This is the second book in a novella series. I believe the third one is coming out this year and is going to be more of like a full-length book because they keep getting bigger and bigger every time. I think the first book was maybe less than 100 pages. I think this one was like 150 pages or something like that. I really loved the first book. I read it in December in preparation for The Haunting of Tramcar 015. I don't know if that's supposed to be 15 with just a 0 in front of it. You didn't need to read the first novella in this series to understand what was going on in The Haunting of Tramcar 015, but it was a really good introduction to the world, so I did pick it up. I highly enjoyed it. And then, so this one ended up being a little bit of a letdown because I really enjoyed the characters that we followed in the first novella, and then they weren't in this one. Like, they were briefly mentioned, but it was a different set of people that we were following, and I did not like them as near so much as the people in the first book. And this kind of takes place in a alternate universe Earth where it is 1920, but there has been like a rift between worlds. So a bunch of fantasy creatures and ghosts and Djinn and all sorts of mythical creatures have breached into our world. So it really does change the landscape of our world, because that's just an accepted part of life, which is really cool. It's very much a steampunky sort of story set in 1920s Cairo, which is really cool. I really love the setting, the ambiance, really cool world. And both of the novellas so far in this little series have been about these investigators. They're pretty much like paranormal investigators, like think Ghost Adventures or BuzzFeed Unsolved, but like they're funded by the government and they help kick out ghosts and solve problems with like the Djinn and the poltergeists and all of these mythical creatures. So it's very much like a Scooby-Doo Monster of the Week type format. And I still really enjoyed this one, and I might pick up the third book in the series, especially if it is becoming like a book series, because the #1 complaint that I had of the first 2 installations was that they were just way too short. The first one dealt with a conflict that was supposed to be like world-shattering, end of the world sort of thing, and obviously that's a lot harder to build up those kind of stakes when you just have like 70 pages to do so. But the world is really cool. Just like I mentioned, I enjoyed the paranormal investigators in the first book, and you don't follow them in the second book, and I just didn't vibe with the main characters as much. So it's still a really fun series, and I would say these are definitely like really good novellas for people who want to participate in like more spooky reads, maybe get into like an atmospheric book for spooky season fall coming up. Wow, why did I say coming up? It's January, but if you're already trying to figure out books that you want to read in in like September and October, I feel like this would be a good jumping off point for someone who maybe likes the idea of reading horror, likes the idea of reading about supernatural things, but doesn't want to be like get into like a real hardcore horror. I think this would be a really good place to start. The writing was really immersive and fun. And then the next book that I read was for the prompt, read a book in the dark. And I read this as an ebook on my phone in the dark, and that's going to be The Pale Dreamer by Samantha Shannon, and this is the prequel novella to the Bone Season series because yesterday, was it yesterday? No, it wasn't. It was 2 days ago at this point. I picked up the Bone Season. Wasn't on my TBR for this month at all, but it was just sitting on my shelf and it was really calling to me. Prior to the Orange Tree is one of my favorite books, and it's just a little crazy at this point that I haven't picked up the Bone Season series. I had picked the Bone Season up, but then when I was going through Goodreads adding it to my currently reading, I saw there was a prequel novella. And even though it came out a couple years after the Bone Season did, I have heard that it is a really good place to start from, and it answers a lot of questions that maybe the Bone Season didn't answer in the first installation. So I had already read like a good 50 pages in the Bone Season, so I decided to go ahead and pick up the novella and read that before I dove more into the Bone Season. And so The Pale Dreamer is a prequel. I don't know if I would say that I would read it before the Bone Season, because I feel like had I read it before I'd read any of the Bone Season, I still would have been really lost. I feel like a lot of people criticize the info dump at the beginning of the Bone Season, describing the world and the different clairvoyants and the people within it and all of that world building that you get really, really fast. But I felt like that's almost what I would suggest, because I thought that worked really, really well for me, was reading like the first couple of chapters, going back, reading the prequel, filling in those gaps in the information, and then going on forward, because I can't imagine reading The Pale Dreamer before knowing anything about the Bone Season, because there's like not a lot of world building. It's mostly like character development and explaining character relationships that you may have been confused upon when picking up the Bone Season, but I really enjoyed it, and now I'm even more excited to delve into the series because it was a very short novella. January has been a really weird month. Normally I really stay away from shorter form content just because it's just not my preference of book-ish material to consume. But the only 3 things that I've read have been a graphic novel, a novella, and I've had a really good reading month so far. So I don't know, we might be seeing a little bit of a change up in my content this year. Probably not, but the novellas that I have been reading have really surprised me in a good way. But I can't say much about that one without also talking about the Bone Season. So it's like a sci-fi fantasy series set in, I think, 2050. About a world where there are clairvoyants, and to be a clairvoyant is to be an enemy of the state, and the Scion, which is like the government system, is very oppressive, and it's very much like a dystopian sci-fi system. But if you have these supernatural powers, then you are put to death. Our main character, Paige Mahoney, the Pale Dreamer, in The Pale Dreamer, that's her code name because she is a part of a clairvoyant gang, because there's really no other option for her in a world where her being herself is illegal. Paige is a very, very powerful clairvoyant, and she's just starting to come into her powers and see the limits of her powers. And again, not far into the Bone Season at all, but I'm sure there's going to be a start of a larger conflict, obviously, to keep a 7-book series going. But it's like an urban fantasy plus more of a dystopian sci-fi feel at the same time. It's really cool. I'm really liking it. What I'm really enjoying about the Bone Season in particular is that I was nervous when I saw it was in first person, because normally I greatly prefer third person narratives to first person narratives. Just personal preference. I don't think one's better than the other. Just for me and my reading tastes, I like third person better. However, this really felt, I don't know if this is considered adult or young adult, but this really felt like just diving in. The first paragraph in particular, where it starts off with, "I'd like to imagine there were more of us in the beginning. Not many, I suppose, but more than there are now. We are the minority the world does not accept. Not outside of fantasy, and even that's blacklisted. We look like everyone else. Sometimes we act like everyone else." And so I don't know if anyone has ever read the Animorphs series. That was a hugely popular series back when I was in grade school in the early 2000s. But every single Animorphs book started off like that, where it's like, I'm not going to tell you my real name. We're in danger. No one knows who we are, where we are. We could even be among you. And that just just hit like a really nostalgic button for me, and I'm just really excited to delve more into this series. So that's been pretty much what I've been reading. And I've also been plowing along in Dreamcatcher by Stephen King. I'm only on page 102. This one, I don't know if I'm going to finish it in the span of a readathon because I am enjoying it, but it is very slow. There are some things that are kind of starting to happen in the plot, and I feel like what I really enjoy about, you know, reading multiple books from the same author, and this is not just for King, it's for, I feel like, a lot of authors, which is not a problem. It's something that I enjoy. But I feel like once you've read a lot of a certain author, you can kind of tell when you're reading this book what things are going to be important and what things are going to build up to the bigger conflict. So there are a lot of things in here where I feel like maybe if you'd pick this up as your first Stephen King book, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you did, if you're reading this, you might kind of gloss over some certain aspects and details that I feel like had you read King before, you'd understand what things he tends to like in a narrative and what small, subtle, little creepy things that he adds before it starts getting really creepy. Still waiting for the aliens. The readathon ends on Sunday, and it's not going to look too likely that I'm gonna finish this one, but I am making headway through this as well. And that's really going to be the reading update for today. It was a longer update, but again, just because of Coos being American is so fun, I just didn't really update yesterday. So yeah, a podcast that I listen to, the Betches Sub podcast, always ends their podcast with "until the return of democracy" or "until the end of democracy," depending on how optimistically the day's news events are going. And that's like, I very much feel that right now because who knows? It might be the political pessimist in me or just anxiety in general, but that's like how I feel right now. Those are the vibes I'm feeling right now. So I'm very, very thankful that this readathon is going on right now so I can just not constantly doom scroll on Facebook and Instagram. And yeah, a fun spooky readathon definitely needed right now. But I am gonna go and I will talk to you guys a little bit later. Happy Saturday. I just spent way too much time today playing the Animal Crossing fishing tourney, which on the plus side is very, very good for audiobook reading, not so much for physical reading. So I have been slowly making my way through Dreamcatcher. Once I finish Dreamcatcher, I will have finished all the books that I wanted to read for Winterween and also all the prompts except for the group book. I'm going to be honest, Dreamcatcher is not my favorite Stephen King book that I've ever read, nor is it my least favorite. It's like in the lower middle of his books, I would say. And I'll definitely talk about it more tomorrow in the wrap up because I'm hoping to finish this chunker tonight. I am like almost exactly halfway through this. I still need to do some laundry tonight. So I am planning on hopefully busting out the rest of that book tonight because I do read the physical book far faster than I read the audiobook. So the audiobook says that I have 11 hours left, and that's a bit ridiculous. So just based on the fact that it would be a lot shorter for me to read this physically rather than the audio, and also I like the voices that my head supplies for the characters a lot better than the audiobook. So I don't think it's going to take me 11 hours to finish it, but I'll probably listen to it a little bit while I'm doing laundry and then close out the night with some physical reading because that's how I'm preferring to read this book. But just a short and sweet little update because it was definitely a very, very lazy day for me. I did want to come on here and give a little bit of a reading update. I did decide, if you can see over there on my bookshelf, I'm not prioritizing the Bone Season even though I'm really loving it, but I want to take my time with that one and I don't want to like cram it in for a readathon, especially because this one ends tomorrow. So yeah, I'm hoping to finish Dreamcatcher either tonight or tomorrow morning, and then that'll be my winterween TBR done. So I will check back in with you guys tomorrow. So it's officially the end of the winterween readathon, so I'm just here to do a quick little wrap up of all the books that I managed to read during this readathon. I did manage to fulfill every single prompt except for the group book, which was a little disappointing. I wanted to find the group book, just wasn't in the cards with my book buying ban at the moment, but this was a really good kickoff and start to my reading in January. So let's just go down all the prompts. First prompt was read a book with the word haunt in the title, and for that one I read The Haunting of Tram Car 15 by P. Djeli Clark, and I really enjoyed this one. I did go over it in depth in the middle of this vlog. This was a very good novella set in a alternate universe steampunk 1920s Cairo, Egypt, and I really enjoyed this. It felt like a Scooby-Doo monster mystery of the week sort of format, and if you're really looking for something that has ghosts and supernatural creatures in it without being really horrifying but still a little bit spooky and more of like a fun spooky atmosphere to it, definitely recommend that one. It is a part of a series, but you can absolutely read any of them, at least the ones that are published so far, independently of one another. The next prompt was read a book in the dark, and I read The Pale Dreamer by Samantha Shannon. This is the prequel novella to the Bone Season series, and this definitely was like my least horror book of this readathon, but I really want to start and catch up with that series this year because I think I'm really going to enjoy it. So I thought a readathon would be a great time to prioritize a novella because novellas are perfect for readathons. I enjoyed this one in the pieces of characterization that we got. It was very like character setup-y as opposed to a little plot or anything like that, but I enjoyed it and I'm really excited to continue on with the series. The next prompt was read a creepy novella or a short story, and I could have used one of the previously mentioned works for this one, but I did want to try and read as much as possible and start my January off on a good note. So for that one, I read Monstress Volume 5 by Marjorie and Sara Takeda, and I really enjoyed this one. This was my absolute favorite volume of this graphic novel series so far. Each volume really builds upon the world and the characters in a wonderful way, and I absolutely loved this one. This, without a doubt, was my absolute favorite book that I read during this readathon. If you haven't picked this graphic novel series up, I highly recommend. I don't think it gets enough hype as it should. It's a steampunk horror fantasy graphic novel series with amazing badass female characters, tons of morally great characters. The artwork is superb. The world is so immersive and so cool. This is my very first book that I read in 2021, and I'm really excited for the rest of 2021 just because this just really kicked off the year on a really high note. And then the last book that I finished that definitely took me the most time, and it was the heftiest tome on here, was Dreamcatcher by Stephen King. This, I wouldn't necessarily classify it as a horror. I think that's definitely a problem with a lot of Stephen King's books, is that a lot of people maybe have different expectations going into them just because they tend to be different genres. He genre hops a lot more than people give him credit for. So while this definitely had some horror elements to it and some like body horror elements especially, this really felt more like a sci-fi sort of thriller rather than a traditional horror, but it definitely had horror elements, so a blend of those genres. I had more fun reading this than I was anticipating. I definitely didn't go into this with very high expectations because I had not heard a lot of wonderful things about it. And before I forget, this was for the prompts: read a book with a blue cover and then read a book with a winter setting, and this checked both of those boxes. This is a very interesting reading experience because I think this book gets more hate than it deserves. I don't think it's the most innovative thing that Stephen King has ever written, and I wouldn't recommend it for new readers of Stephen King just because there are so many Easter eggs in here actually, which is really fun. It does take place in the town of Derry, Maine, so there are some very heavy references to it in particular, which I really enjoyed. This is very heavy with tropes that Stephen King tends to use throughout his whole entire collection. There's a group of friends that meet when they're in childhood, although these friends mostly you follow them in their teens as opposed to when they're very young. So that's very reminiscent of it, but it's a group of teens and then they grow up and become adults, and the majority of this book takes place when they get together. You know, it's kind of like childhood friends where they've grown apart as they've gotten older, and then every single year they gather together to go on an annual hunting trip to bond. So the majority of this book takes place during one of these hunting trips, and some creepy things start happening during their hunting expedition. They find themselves in the middle of a battle between the US government and aliens. Definitely not my least favorite Stephen King book that I've read. In fact, I think it's definitely a good book, and I feel like if you read this, the craft is there, the writing style is there, the dual timelines are done really, really well here, and really interesting too, in where large segments of this book, one of the characters, try not to give spoilers, but a lot of flashbacks are seen through dreams and kind of realizing things that are important to the plot now through flashback sort of dreams, which is really cool. This didn't bring anything substantially new to the table, so that's why it's kind of going to be on my lower end of the list of Stephen King books that I've read, and also just the characters, I didn't really click with them. Ultimately, I think it's going to be more of like one of his more forgettable books for me, but I did think it was interesting. You can definitely tell that this is a product of King's real life experiences because if you didn't know, Stephen King kind of infamously had a very severe car accident, I think in like 1999 or 2000, somewhere around that time frame. He was in a car accident where he was a pedestrian and got hit by a car, and it was very, very serious. And he does talk about this at length on writing and in interviews too, but it was a very serious car accident, and it was a very, very long rehab process. And you can really tell a lot of his books around this time really have those themes in it, and you can really tell how those life experiences really influenced his craft during this time, especially in Dreamcatcher, because there is a character that has a car accident that is very, very similar to what he went through. A lot of King's work in general, his main characters tend to draw a lot off of his life experiences and his personalities and whatnot, but one of the main characters had a car accident with the situation almost identical to what he went through, and then so just going through the mental recovery and the physical recovery and the rehab process and all of that in here was definitely interesting, especially if you kind of think of it maybe more as, you know, he definitely went through some of the things. So that was very interesting. And then the author's note at the end where he was talking about how this book was a part of his therapy. He actually wrote it on paper as opposed to like a typewriter or a computer or anything like that. He wrote this entirety of this book with pencil and paper, which, you know, it's a chunker, so that's pretty impressive. Not a lot of people do that anymore, but he was talking about how therapeutic it was and also how much he was working through different things, which I think you can really tell in here. And actually he wanted to call it Cancer, and that would be made very clear if you're reading this book. You could tell how that almost would have been the title for this book, but his wife read it and said, no, like we gotta, like, let's put a more optimistic spin on this. Let's call it Dreamcatcher. And I think that was a good change. So I don't know what I'm saying. I hate saying this because it sounds very gatekeepery, but I think that people who are like really constant readers or Stephen King fans will appreciate this a little bit more than someone just kind of diving into this as a first book, just because I feel like there's so much history behind the scenes about knowing that this book was very therapeutic. And obviously I don't want to give like a free pass to anyone, but I can definitely see where it might have been more comforting if this was a therapeutic exercise to rely on a bunch of familiar plot structures and tropes that Stephen King loves using. So definitely a long tangent, but I enjoyed this more than I thought I would. Not going to be one of my favorite Stephen King books. I adore the cover still. This is one of my favorite Stephen King covers ever, and just kind of knowing the backstory about this book makes me appreciate it more. So definitely an interesting read. And I'm very glad that it fit the challenges, because I'm gonna be honest, this was not very high on my list of Stephen King books that I wanted to get to this year, but just because it fit so many prompts, I fit it in. So that's pretty cool, because I don't really see myself having maybe even read it this year if it had not been for this readathon, so that's really cool. Now, I did read a couple other books that I didn't really talk about in the vlogs because they weren't really a part of the winterween readathon, and I did pick up Bone Season. Like I mentioned, I just didn't want to have the readathon pressure of trying to read this as fast as possible, especially since it's the first book in the series with a lot of world building. I just wanted to take my time with this, but I'm really looking forward to finishing this in the month of January. And I also was working my way through To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini, which I guess could have worked for like read a book with a blue cover, but I haven't finished it because that book is a journey. But that is going to be it for this reading vlog. Thank you so much, Gabby and Olivia, for hosting this readathon. It was a lot of fun, a great way to start off 2021, and that's all I have for you guys. So please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe for more content from me, stay safe, stay spooky, and I'll see y'all on the other side. Bye!